Okay, so just a little bit of background why we're running these sessions. Today is, I think, the fourth session of these introductory webinars to the NMA platform. And it was back at the 5th Glasgow Committee meeting in June during the climate conference that parties requested some specific capacity building support on the use of the NMA platform, which was just launched in May. This webinar will provide an overview of the platform itself, including details of how parties can submit their non-market approaches. So we've really targeted the session at national focal points, and they are the people who have access to record their parties' non-market approaches on the platform. I know we have some non-national focal points in this session as well, but I think it'll also provide a useful overview for how non-market approaches are recorded through this system. And we do plan, probably after COP, on developing a training series for support providers, including non-government organisations, foundations, etc., on the platform as well, and how those parties or those actors can be engaged with the platform. But today we're really looking at the role of national focal points. And the aim of the session is to increase the number of non-market approaches that we have recorded voluntarily by parties to exchange information on best practices and on lessons learned, including hopefully to discuss at the in-session workshop that will be held on Article 6.8 in Baku during COP in a couple of months' time. So this is the agenda for today's session. We will go through the definition of non-market approaches, or NMAs for short, under the framework referred to in Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. And we'll also look at some examples of existing non-market approaches to make the text a little bit more practical. We'll then introduce the NMA platform, including the key features and sections, and then go step by step through the national focal point section for recording non-market approaches. So we'll look at how that's done. And finally, we'll review the compliance requirements so that everyone's very clear on what is mandatory in this process. So there will be time for questions before we close the session. Because we do have a lot of content to get through, I would ask that you please hold your questions until that session. But if you do have a burning short question as I'm going through the presentation, then please do feel free to unmute and just to come in. I'm not going to be able to see if anybody has their hand raised because I'm sharing my screen, but you can just come in and interrupt me. Okay, so just starting briefly with the basics to set the scene. I won't spend too much time on this. Article 6.8 recognises that not all market action needs to be market driven. So on that basis, it complements the market-based mechanisms of Articles 6.2 and 6.4 by promoting voluntary non-market approaches to achieving nationally determined contributions. And that's in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication. So the full text of Article 6.8 is on the screen. And here I really want to emphasise the aims of non-market approaches, which are points A, B and C on the screen. These directly relate to the submission process for recording a non-market approach on the platform. So to emphasise, these aims are A, non-market approaches should promote mitigation and adaptation ambition, enhance public and private sector participation in the implementation of NDCs, and finally enable opportunities for coordination across instruments and relevant institutional arrangements. And that's under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. So these aims include a focus not just on climate change mitigation and adaptation, but more specifically on finance, technology development and transfer, and capacity building, as I've highlighted in the text there. And those themes will keep recurring as we go through the submission process with the platform. Broadly speaking, the focus of Article 6.8 is on ways that parties can cooperate to develop and implement non-market approaches with such a focus. And that's something that cooperation will also look at as we look through the NMA platform and its features. So a little bit of background for you. The Glasgow Committee on Non-Market Approaches was established during COP26 in Glasgow to further define and operationalise non-market approaches beyond the text that we just went through. So further to those aims, that ABC, as outlined in the previous slide, via the Glasgow Committee, parties agreed on some defining characteristics of non-market approaches, which are on the screen here. So each non-market approach facilitated under the framework is identified by the parties on a voluntary basis, involves more than one participating party, and that's very key to that point on collaboration that I mentioned earlier. It does not involve the transfer of any mitigation outcomes. It facilitates the implementation of NDCs of host parties and contributes to achieving the long-term temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. Is conducted in a manner that is consistent with the 11th preambular paragraph of the Paris Agreement, and minimises and, where possible, avoids negative environmental, economic and social impacts. So as long as an initiative or a project meets these criteria and the aims that were stated in the Paris Agreement text for Article 6.8, it can be considered a non-market approach under Article 6.8, and it can be recorded on the platform. But it does need to meet every one of these points. And the application, or the submission process rather, does get parties to explain how each of these points are being met through your project. Also as agreed to by parties in Glasgow, the initial 3 focus areas of the NMA work program include adaptation, resilience and sustainability, mitigation measures to address climate change and contribute to sustainable development, and the development of clean energy sources. So additional focus areas may be recommended by the Glasgow Committee, and that's including based on any information that is submitted to the NMA platform. As you can see, all of these criteria are very broad and are quite high level. And as a result, there's really a variety of initiatives and projects that could meet the requirements. To help clarify more specifically what a non-market approach is in practice, I'll just provide 2 brief examples of existing non-market approaches. So these were the 2 that I'll present were both presented in past Glasgow Committee meetings. So those of you who attend meetings, I apologise for any duplication, but this way we'll all be on the same page. So first we have Subaru, which was launched by Japan and UN Habitat back at COP27. So this is a multi-country approach where Japan is working with several countries across the Asia-Pacific region. And through Subaru, through this initiative, Japan uses the technologies and expertise of Japanese companies to address adaptation challenges of cities in the Asia-Pacific region. The aim is to enhance the resilience of these cities to weather-related disasters. So it's looking at adaptation challenges at a larger citywide scale. Subaru is achieving these aims by investing in infrastructure, technology and innovation, as well as by providing policy and regulatory support, including by promoting public-private partnerships, as well as through capacity building and knowledge sharing. Looking at something a little bit different, the next example is Locale, which is a mechanism established by UNCDF to help local government authorities in developing countries finance climate adaptation. So the focus here really is on the word local, as opposed to the broader city focus of the Subaru initiative. So Locale does this by combining performance-based grants with technical and capacity building support. At the global level, Locale is financed by the EU, CEDA, and the governments of Liechtenstein and Andorra. But there are many more donor countries that support the mechanism also through arrangements at the local level. So currently, Locale is operational in 20 countries, while a further 18 are in the design phase. So again, this is a multi-country approach, so it meets that collaboration criteria of Article 6.8, where we need at least 2 countries to be considered. But this time, as opposed to Subaru, where it was Japan dealing with a number of countries in Asia Pacific, here the support is provided through a UN mechanism, as opposed to having a central donor in the middle. As an example of the type of work Locale is doing, a case study from Ghana is on the screen on the right. So Locale has channeled performance-based climate resilience grants to 13 local government authorities in Ghana. One authority used the funds to plant 8,500 mangrove seedlings to help preserve biodiversity. Another planted coconut trees around a village school to protect it from hazards such as strong winds. As you can see, the mechanism has really enabled local solutions to address local needs. So different approach to Subaru, but both examples, both initiatives meet the criteria of a non-market approach under Article 6.8. Okay, so we'll get to the platform now. That was an overview of what is a non-market approach. We'll look at the NMA platform itself now, which can be accessed via the URL at the bottom of the screen. In terms of a quick background, the development of the platform was first mandated in Glasgow as part of the work program for Article 6.8. So the specifications for the platform were then agreed to in Sharm el-Sheikh. And then in Dubai last year, national focal points for Article 6.8 were established to enable parties to access the platform. As I said at the start, the platform was only launched in May this year, so it is relatively new. This means we don't yet have any non-market approaches recorded from parties, but the intention once these do start coming through is that the platform will connect participating parties to identify, to develop, and to implement their non-market approaches, as well as exchange information on what is and isn't working and notify other parties and stakeholders if they're seeking any additional support for their non-market approach. The published non-market approaches, once they are submitted, so they will appear here at the bottom of the homepage, and they will also appear here on the map. So we'll have a visual representation of where the work is being implemented. These NMAs will then be able to be filtered by region, by country, focus area, and sector, as well as whether the NMA needs any additional support and the type of support that it is already providing. So some of the other key features include the dedicated section for national focal points, and we'll go through this in a little bit more detail shortly. This is where the non-market approaches are submitted by parties. There is also a section on the available support for non-market approaches and an information hub. A discussion forum is currently under development, and this will facilitate networking amongst active users of the platform. We're hoping that this will be up and running by COP. So please keep an eye out for this. We'll be notifying focal points once it's up and running. Okay, so looking at the support available section, here support providers are able to list details of the type of support that they provide. And when I say support provider, really that's any organisation that provides financial assistance, technology development and transfer, or capacity building support for non-market approaches. This can include NGOs, UN agencies, foundations, development banks, really any organisation that has been working on the areas that we've been discussing. These organisations can then very easily register their services on the platform. So by clicking on register as a support provider, organisations just need to fill in a very simple form. There's no need to register separately with the secretariat or anything like that. And the purpose of this is to assist in matching parties requiring support with the organisations who provide that support. So for the parties that we have online, I would really encourage you to highlight this opportunity with the organisations that you're working with on your non-market approaches so that they can register and easily share their information with others who may need it. So we do have, I think at the moment, 7 support providers registered with us. So they can be found at the bottom of the page. And here, anyone that's visiting the platform can see the types of support that these organisations provide, their focus areas, and a summary of what they do. Due to a glitch, we are having it addressed. The region section is not working at the moment, but eventually, once we get that fixed, you'll also be able to see visually on the map where each of these support providers is currently functioning. And when that's done, also, as with the non-market approaches on the previous screen, support providers can be filtered by their focus area, by where they operate, etc. Okay, so this is the information hub section of the NMA platform. And this includes various information and resources for parties and non-party stakeholders, including on past and upcoming meetings and relevant CMA decisions. So events and meetings links to different Glasgow Committee meeting pages. And if you click on See All, you can actually view a list of all the past meetings. And from here, download related documents, including presentations that have been made during past workshops. So for Baku, we will be setting up new meeting pages for the 6th Glasgow Committee meeting and the related insertion workshop. So you can keep an eye out there for that. The resources section links to key documents, including the NMA Platform User Manual. I think a link was shared with you to that in the meeting invitation. We also have in this section the list of 6.8 national focal points and the relevant CMA decisions that guide the work of the Glasgow Committee. And finally, related links are links to relevant web pages and sites that can support the work on non-market approaches. Okay, so now that we've gone over the layout of the NMA platform, we'll move to look at the national focal point section in some more detail. As I previously mentioned, this is accessed by clicking on the blue button, which appears on the top right-hand corner of every page on the platform. So once you click through, you will be taken to a login page. And only Article 6.8 national focal points that have registered with the Secretariat will have access to log into this section. If you are having trouble with your login, then please email us at nma-platform@unfccc.int. And if you want to double check who the national focal point is for your country or for another country, like I said, the link is in the Information Hub section of the platform. So once you are logged in, you will arrive at the welcome page for national focal points. And here you'll be able to submit new non-market approaches to the platform on behalf of your party, as well as view any non-market approaches that you have previously submitted or that you have in draft form. I'll also note that you will be able to view any non-market approaches that involve your party that a different party is drafting. So that will also appear here and you'll be able to access that information. At the moment, it's blank because I have not drafted anything, but we'll next walk through in detail how to actually create a draft and submit an NMA, starting by clicking on Submit a New Non-Market Approach. Okay, so the opening screen of the NMA submission form just seeks some basic details on your NMA. In total, we have 5 steps for the submission process, so we'll go through each of those 5. I've included some text, some instructions in the text boxes. They're mostly self-explanatory, but there are a few points that I'll emphasize as we go through the form. So, title is an obvious one. This is the title of your non-market approach. It can only be 100 characters, including spaces. So I will note here that there are character restrictions across the form. Besides the title box, most of the text boxes have a limit of 1,000 characters, including spaces, which is about the length of a short paragraph. So we're not after essays or long explanations. Each of these sections should just be the core points that answer the question. To assist, because 1,000 characters can seem a little bit abstract, to assist with that drafting process and to help you keep count of the characters you're using, we have prepared an offline Word template where you can just highlight your text and see how many characters you've used, and we can share this with you after this presentation. Then it's just a case of copying and pasting onto the online form. Summary should just be a brief overview of your non-market approach. And here I would suggest writing this last after you've completed the rest of the form so that you can pick out the key pieces of information that you would like to highlight. When your NMA is published, the summary is the first thing that people will see when they see your NMA on that homepage. The submitting party is the National Focal Points party, so the person who is logged in, and this field will be automatically populated. You then need to select whether or not you are the hosting party. So if you're financing the NMA, but it's being implemented in a different country, then you would just leave it as no. If it's being implemented in your country, you can just move that dial across to yes. Finally, the national focal points details will appear under contact email and name, just as default, but these can be changed if there is a more relevant contact point for the specific non-market approach that you are uploading. Please note that all of the fields that have an asterisk are mandatory and are needed to successfully submit your non-market approach. You can leave these blank while you have the form in draft and move across the different steps, but you won't actually be able to submit the form until all of these sections have been completed. And then when you're ready, you can just click on Next to move to step 2. Okay, so step 2 begins with identifying the focus area of the NMA. And this is just a simple drop-down menu made up of 3 choices. And these are in line with the 3 NMA focus areas that we went through earlier in the presentation. So I've got all 3 on the screen for you, and you can select as many as is needed here, depending on your non-market approach. The submission date is automatically set by the server, so you don't need to do anything. And the implementation start and end year, these you can select from a calendar menu. They're the start and end dates of your non-market approach, but they can be left blank. So depending on where you are in your implementation cycle, you may not yet know the exact implementation end date, so you can leave that blank. Other participating parties is mandatory, and this goes back to the requirement that non-market approaches must involve more than one participating party. So here you can click on Add Party, and a pop-up box appears where you can select the party from a drop-down menu and then indicate whether they are a hosting party. And if you have the information, you can also provide the contact details within that party, but that can be left blank if you don't know what it is. So you can add as many participating parties as necessary just by repeating that step. As we saw from our examples, the Subaru and Locale, some non-market approaches can be multi-country and involve numerous different parties. So these would all be added here by clicking on that Add Party button. And then the last item here is non-party participant. And this is where you can list any non-party actors involved in your NMA. So your support providers, any implementing agencies or implementing partners that you're working with, they can be listed here and just separated with a comma. Before we move on, I just want to highlight that at any point after you pass step 1, you can click on Save as Draft to save what you've written so far and then come back to it at a later time. So a link to the form will then appear at the bottom of your National Focal Point welcome page. Okay, so step 3. Step 3, this is where the written content starts. And I have broken step 3 up into 2 slides because there are a number of questions here that need to be answered. The first text box, this asks you to provide a description of your non-market approach. This will likely be similar to the summary text from step 1. Though while the summary will usually be quite broad, here you may choose to elaborate on just 1 or 2 key points instead, but it's up to you how you choose to approach this. The next 3 text boxes are all based on the aims of non-market approaches as stated in Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement. So this is that ABC that we looked at the start of the presentation. So this includes describing how the NMA aims to promote mitigation and adaptation priorities, describing how the NMA aims to or has enhanced participation of the public and private sector and civil society organisations in the implementation of NDCs, and describing how the NMA aims to enable opportunities for coordination across instruments and relevant institutional arrangements. As I did say, I think at step 1, it's only a short paragraph that's required for each of these. So still on step 3, we have here the remaining 3 text boxes, and the text for these comes from the work program under the framework for non-market approaches. And this was agreed to in Decision 4 CMA 3 for those who are interested. So this includes describing how the NMA assists participating parties in implementing their NDCs in an integrated, holistic and balanced manner through mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology development and transfer and capacity building, as well as through contribution to sustainable development and poverty eradication. And finally, describing how the participating parties ensure the NMA does not and will not involve the transfer of any mitigation outcomes. For step 4, there are 3 text boxes, and all of these are also related to the work program under the framework for non-market approaches. So this includes describing how the NMA facilitates the implementation of NDCs of host parties and contributes to achieving the long-term temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. Describing how the NMA is conducted in a manner that is consistent with the 11th preambular paragraph of the Paris Agreement. And describing how the NMA minimises and, where possible, avoids negative environmental, economic and social impacts. So these are all points we also went through back earlier in the presentation. And as with the previous steps, each text box has a limit of 1,000 characters, including spaces. Now, at the bottom of step 4, you will find some tick boxes on support for your non-market approach. And this includes both support that your non-market approach is providing, but also support that your NMA might need. And additional options appear when you select any one of those tick boxes. So starting with support provided, there we go. You can see that when you click on provided, additional fields appear for you to indicate the type of support. And by clicking on the drop-down menu, you can choose up to 3 of those options. In the text box, you can then write a brief description, though that's not required. The same step is taken for support needed. You can select the type from the drop-down menu, and if you like, write a brief description. And you can check one or both of those options depending on your NMA. So you can check support provided or support needed, or both of them. But if for some reason neither of those options apply to you, you can simply select not applicable, as is on the screen now, and the other options disappear. I think that 99% of non-market approaches will have either support provided or support needed selected, because this is really at the basis of non-market approach initiatives. There might be a case maybe where you're in the very early stages of development and you don't yet know what that support will be. So in that situation, you have the option of selecting not applicable. Okay, so finally, we have reached step 5. And in this section, only the sector section is mandatory. The rest are all optional, though of course it's always better if you can provide more information to help with learning and information exchange with other parties. But sector is just a simple drop-down menu with 6 possible options. And I've got all of them highlighted on the screen there. So you can select as many as are relevant to your non-market approach. Keywords and tags are free entry fields, and the decision to include these items was taken in CMA 4. So while there's no concrete definition of keywords and tags, I think in short, keywords are terms that are used to help search for a submission, while tags are used more to help organize and to group, different types of non-market approaches. So the text for your keywords should come from, ideally, the text from your form, from your submission. And I think you can think about it in terms of what other words that people would type if they were searching for your non-market approach. So, what is it about? Words like forests or private sector or solar power. what are the key topics that your non-market approach is exploring or is addressing. Tags, on the other hand, describe more if you were to group different non-market approaches together, like what would the categories be? So this is usually higher level compared to keywords. So it might be, sustainable development or climate financing. There is no specific definition, which means that there is no wrong answer for how you choose to approach keywords and tags. And it's also not mandatory. So I would just say put what you think works best for your non-market approach. Next is a text box on quantitative and qualitative outcomes. And this can be a brief description either of what you expect your NMA will achieve or what it has already achieved, depending on where you are in the project lifecycle. Under best practices and lessons learned, you have the option to highlight some key lessons, also from the different stages of your non-market approach. And just finishing off step 5, you can provide a description of any significant or relevant linkages with the non-market approach that you have experienced, and that will vary just depending on what sort of project you're implementing. And finally, any views on how the NMA could be scaled up or replicated. Finally, before you finish up, you will have the option to include links to relevant websites or to external documents that are already published online. You won't actually be able to upload any new documents. You can only link to those that are published elsewhere. And then when you're done, you can click on Submit. And this is where, if you have not completed all of the mandatory information, you will get an error notification showing you which sections still need to be completed. Otherwise, at this point, once you submit, the NMA is sent to the secretariat for review. Okay, so once it's submitted, your NMA will at this point be visible on your National Focal Point welcome page in reviewing status. And this means that it's with the secretariat. And I want to highlight here that once you submit your non-market approach, you will no longer be able to go back in and edit it. Editing can only take place when the NMA is in draft form. So something to keep in mind before you click on Submit. Prior to publishing submitted non-market approaches, the Secretariat will check to ensure that all of the information is clear and complete. And we will also perform a concurrence check to make sure that the non-market approach involves more than one party. So to do this, we will reach out to any participating parties, all of the participating parties, I should say, that have been listed in your non-market approach, and then we give them 30 days to review the submission. This is done on a no objection basis, meaning that if we do not hear back within 30 days, we take it that there's no issue and we will publish the NMA. Because of this concurrence period, though, I would like to stress that if you would like to have your NMA published in time for COP in Baku, then you must submit it to the NMA platform by the first week of October, because we do require that 30-day period for the concurrence check, plus a couple of days for the Secretariat to conduct the review. So very important, please keep that in mind. So we'll finish by summarising the compliance requirements for the NMA platform to ensure that you can successfully register your non-market approaches. And there are 3 main factors that need to be met. So number 1, does your NMA meet all of the aims and characteristics of non-market approaches as outlined in Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement and the relevant CMA decisions? So this is what we went over at the start of the presentation. In particular, the NMA needs to meet the requirements in the work program, and that's found in Decision 4 CMA 3. And just as an example, this includes, does it involve more than one party? I've mentioned that point a couple of times. Does it not involve the transfer of mitigation outcomes? And that's very important to the non-market aspect. And does it assist the participating parties in implementing their NDCs through mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology transfer and capacity building, and contribution to sustainable development and poverty eradication? So number 2, have all the mandatory questions on the NMA submission form been completed? As I mentioned earlier, the system will not let you submit your form if you have not answered a question that is marked as mandatory. And then finally, are all of your written responses under 1,000 characters, including spaces? Because again, the online form just won't let you move beyond those 1,000 characters. So if you are drafting in the offline document, then please keep track of how long your text is, because you won't be able to copy and paste anything that is over those 1,000 characters. Okay, so before we open for questions, I just want to acknowledge again that the types of projects or initiatives that can constitute a non-market approach under Article 6.8 are very broad. The characteristics are very broad and high level. So as a result, this means that a whole range of ministries or departments across your government can potentially be responsible for something that is a non-market approach. It just may not be called that. So I would suggest, we've had some feedback from other parties that they weren't quite sure where to start in identifying their non-market approaches. So if there's nothing obvious within your own work area, I think a useful place to start is looking at your government's development aid program. So given Article 6.8 has a focus on sustainable development and poverty eradication, this could be potentially a useful place to, to have some discussions to see what sort of projects are being managed through the development aid program. And whilst I don't think any development aid program or project will use the specific terminology of a non-market approach, there could be some climate-focused aid initiatives that meet the requirements of what we've been talking about today. I think I mentioned at the start when we first logged onto the webinar that I used to previously work with the UN in Somalia. And as one example, the UN was implementing some climate adaptation projects in Somalia funded by donor countries. So you've got that, 2 or more party requirement met. And these projects could be considered as non-market approaches, even though they were never called that. So I would encourage you to speak with your colleagues across government on this, particularly if you're not sure where to begin. I think recording NMAs on the platform does provide countries with an opportunity for increased visibility and recognition of your approaches to climate action. And it can also highlight the co-benefits of climate action, including poverty reduction, social inclusion, and sustainable development. It can also potentially attract interest from other donors or organisations that are looking to support non-market solutions to climate change. So these might be some useful points for you to highlight in any cross-government discussions that you're having on the topic, because it could be a win-win situation for yourself and another government department that you're having these conversations with. And finally, just for further assistance, if you're stuck on the form and how to actually submit your non-market approach, then the NMA user manual should be your primary point of reference. This includes step-by-step instructions. This is on the Information Hub section of the platform, and we'll also include a link in a follow-up email after this session. For any small questions, you can also write to NMA-platform@unfccc.int and someone will get back to you. And otherwise, also, as I mentioned at the start of the session, if you would like to arrange a bilateral meeting to discuss your NMA or an idea for an NMA or something that you're not sure meets the criteria, or if you have any more specific training needs, then you can contact us through that email address and we'd be happy to set up a bilateral meeting with you. But at this point, I think we can pause, and I've done plenty of talking. So if there are any questions from the floor, I'm happy to take some questions, or if you have any comments as well, that would be useful to hear too. So please feel free to raise your hand or just unmute initially and begin. So over to the room.
Hi, Barbara. Thanks. Very informative meeting. I would have the question regarding the solid waste management, because I saw there is different type of sectors, including infrastructure, urbanization, etc. But this kind of includes bio-circular economy projects include some of different sectors. Which sector could you recommend to categorize solid waste management?
I think that would depend, and thank you for the question. I think that would depend on the specific type of intervention, but I'm just having a look at the sectors now. It could fit under cities, settlements and infrastructure, because I think solid waste management could potentially, depending on the type of intervention, could fit under that infrastructure element, but also it could fit under health and nutrition.
Under the food, exactly, as well, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly, yes. Exactly what I was saying. So I think it depends on the specifics of your intervention, but it sounds like it could fit into a number of those categories. So you can select more than one.
Okay, you can select more than one. Yeah, great, thank you.
Yes, Omar.
Okay, thank you, Barbara, for this informative description, step-by-step description of the MAI guide. So, as I stated during presenting myself and my colleague, we are in the step of appointing the Article 6.4 and 0.8 focal point. We have mailed to the secretariat for this designation more than 1 month ago, but we still not have any reply from this on this matter. So my first question, from where to start for appointing national focal point for this Article 6.8 and even 0.4 also? This is my first question. And definitely this platform, you talk about a bilateral discussion. I think later we will mail you so we can better discuss on this matter related to Mali, specifically on this process. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for the question. Yes, please feel free to email. I think we'd be more than happy to set up a bilateral discussion regarding the appointments for the focal points. For Article 6.8, if you could email whatever you previously sent to that NMA-platform email address, then we can look after it. The official nomination process is through that email address to us. If you like, you can forward the 6.4 nomination to me as well. I'm one of the people monitoring that inbox, and I think that's through the UNFCCC External Relations team, but I could follow that up for you as well. But certainly for 6.8, that's through us. So please do get in contact.
Okay, Thank you.
Are there any other questions in the room?
Okay, Barbara, as there is no question following, I will have another question. You know, in our countries, many experts speak basically French. And this platform, is there any translation plan already, or it is on planning for French in French language? Maybe it will be easier for people also to fill this form later. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I understand the frustration with that. And unfortunately, at the moment, there are no translation plans, and this just comes down to budgetary reasons. It's also why, I mean, the Glasgow committee meetings also are conducted in English without translation, I think. But we have had some focal points communicating with us in French, and there's usually a way around it if we're doing things in writing. So we have some French speaking colleagues here. We have Google Translate. Yeah, there's a way that we can work with you on the form if that language is a barrier. But unfortunately, at this point, there are no plans to actually translate the platform itself.
Okay,
but your point is well noted.
Okay, thank you. And last question, if you can come back about explain a bit about the support available for this mechanism. You explain about some support during your presentation. If you can explain a bit about this support available, technical support. I mean.
Yeah, yes. So we can provide support on helping countries to identify non-market approaches. So what we've done with some other parties that have come to us is they didn't know, they had a range of projects, but they didn't know which or if any of them were a non-market approach. So we're able to walk through questions like that. We're able to, if you, within your government, if there are staff who you would like to understand Article 6.8 more, we can deliver presentations to your government. So we did something similar through our RCCs in Bolivia, for example. So there was an existing workshop happening there, and we did an overview of what Article 6.8 was for some of their staff. So it's really quite broad. It can be specifically related to what is a non-market approach. It can be broader capacity building for your colleagues. It can be, you don't know how to answer a question in the form. So we can help with things like that. I would say if you're not sure, get in touch because we can work something out.
Thank you.
Any final questions? In which case, I'll just share my screen a final time before we finish up. Okay, so if you do think of something after the webinar ends, then please feel free to write to me at the NMA Platform email address. We're really available at any time. This is, as I mentioned at the start, it is a new platform. I think we will be undertaking a little bit of a learning by doing approach. And the more non-market approaches that are submitted, the better idea all parties will have of, what is a non-market approach. So, but we need to start. So we're really happy to work with parties on developing those non-market approaches. I will share a link to this webinar, to the recording with you, should you wish to revisit the content. And I'll also share a copy of the slides and other reference materials that were referenced throughout the presentation via email, probably tomorrow. In the meantime, there is a QR code on the screen for a very short feedback survey on today's session. We want to keep developing these webinars, especially as new national focal points are getting nominated, or for those who haven't been able to attend a session we've done so far. So your feedback will be very useful on that point. It's multiple choice, so it should be very quick for you to do. Otherwise, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time. I hope that this was useful, and myself and my colleagues, we are all ready to assist with any questions that you have. So thank you and have a great rest of the day.